The giant crash shook the whole street. I ran outside, barefoot, heart pounding so fast it felt like it would jump out of my chest. And there it was. My beautiful 60-year-old oak tree, now nothing more than a mountain of broken wood and tangled branches, smashed straight through the roof of Karen Mitchell's house. Karen was standing in the middle of her lawn, screaming at the top of her lungs, her face as red as a tomato. Pieces of her roof hung down like paper. Her living room was wide open, furniture thrown everywhere like a bomb had gone off. And even though it should have been clear to anyone with two working eyes that she had chopped the tree down herself, Karen started pointing at me like I was the villain, right there in front of everyone. "This is your fault! You're gonna pay for this! I'm suing you!" she shrieked. I was frozen. How could this be real? How could someone destroy something so valuable and still blame me? But before I could even open my mouth, I saw two HOA board members marching toward us, clipboards in hand, whispering to each other with very serious looks on their faces. And that's when I knew things were about to get way worse than just a broken house. It wasn't always like this between me and Karen. When I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, it felt like a dream. Quiet streets, kids riding bikes, perfectly trimmed lawns. I was 27, a proud first-time homeowner. My little gray two-story with white shutters was everything I'd worked for. I even had my dream tree, a massive oak in the front yard. It had been planted by the very first owner back in the 1960s, and local arborists said it was worth at least $75,000 because of its rare species and health. I loved that tree like family. Every fall, it exploded into colors that looked straight out of a painting. Every summer, it shaded my front porch perfectly, making it the coolest spot in the neighborhood. The first few months living here were calm. Neighbors waved. Kids played in the sprinklers. On weekends, I'd sit outside with a glass of lemonade and read. It was peace, real peace, until Karen became the HOA president. Karen Mitchell was the kind of person who could find a problem with anything. If your grass grew half an inch too tall, complaint. If your garbage cans weren't hidden exactly behind a fence, fine. She wore bright pink lipstick, had perfectly stiff hair that didn't move even in the wind, and she carried a little clipboard like it was a weapon. At first, I tried to be nice, waving when I saw her, offering to help when the HOA had a cleanup day. But it didn't take long before I realized Karen didn't want kindness. She wanted control. The first time she came after me was over my mailbox. Apparently, the post was too faded. She sent me an official warning letter, threatening a $100 fine if I didn't repaint it within a week. I laughed it off at first, but then more letters started coming. My garden hose was improperly stored. My porch lights were too bright. My car was parked an inch over the line. It became obvious. Karen had it out for me. I still tried to keep my head high. I repainted the mailbox. I neatly coiled my hose. I even bought dimmer lights for the porch. I didn't want trouble. I wanted peace. But peace wasn't what Karen wanted. One morning, about 3 months into her reign of terror, I came outside to find her standing at the base of my oak tree, arms crossed, glaring up at it like it had insulted her. I walked over, careful to keep my voice friendly. "Morning, Karen. Everything okay?" She didn't even look at me, just pointed at the tree. "It's a hazard," she snapped. I blinked, confused. "A hazard? It's been here for 60 years. It's too big. The roots could damage the sidewalk. It's shedding leaves everywhere. It's an eyesore." I swallowed hard. "Karen, this tree was here before any of these houses were even built, and it's healthy. An arborist checks it every year." She gave me a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll be receiving a notice. If you don't take it down, the HOA will take action." And just like that, she stormed off. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got a letter. It said I had 30 days to remove the tree or face a $500 a day fine until I complied. I couldn't believe it. I immediately hired a certified arborist to write an official report. The tree was perfectly healthy, not a threat to anything. I sent the report to the HOA board. I even talked to a lawyer who said they couldn't force me to remove a healthy tree on my own private property. It should have been the end of it. But with Karen, it was only the beginning. For a few weeks after that, things calmed down again. Or at least, it seemed like they had. I'd see Karen walking by, staring at the tree with hatred in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. I figured she had finally realized she couldn't win this one. I was wrong. One Sunday afternoon, while I was visiting my parents 2 towns over, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She hired a random landscaping crew, not even a licensed one, and told them she was acting on behalf of the HOA to remove a dangerous tree. Without permission, without warning. They showed up with chainsaws and a wood chipper. And by the time I got a panicked call from my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, telling me what was happening, it was too late. They had already cut through the thickest trunk at the base. The tree groaned, shifted, and before anyone could react, the whole thing tipped sideways, straight into Karen's house. The crash was so loud that neighbors from 3 streets over came running. Siding cracked like glass. Windows exploded. The roof caved in. It looked like a tornado had touched down. Mrs. Henderson said Karen just stood there at first, too stunned to move, and then she started screaming. When I finally pulled up and saw the mess, it didn't feel real. It looked like a disaster movie set. My beautiful oak, the one I had cared for like a child, was now half buried inside Karen's living room. And somehow, she had the nerve to say it was all my fault. She called the police. She called the HOA board. She called her lawyer. And as I stood there, trying to catch my breath, trying to understand how any of this was even possible, I saw her pointing at me again, telling the cops that I hadn't properly maintained my property, and that she had no choice but to act. The officers started walking toward me, clipboards in hand, serious looks on their faces, and that's when it hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about a broken tree or a broken house. Karen was about to try and ruin my entire life. The officer's boots crunched against the pieces of shattered wood as he walked toward me. His face was blank, like he hadn't decided yet if I was a criminal or just really unlucky. Karen was still screeching in the background, waving her arms and pointing at the gaping hole in her roof. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions," the officer said, flipping open a small notebook. I nodded, my mouth dry. "Of course, officer. I'll tell you everything I know." Another officer was already talking to Karen, writing down her wild story about how she heroically stepped in to remove a dangerous tree before it killed someone. I could see Mrs. Henderson and a few other neighbors standing on the sidewalk, whispering and shaking their heads. I told the officer about the arborist report, about Karen's threats, about the letters from the HOA. I even showed him the photos I had on my phone of the tree. Healthy, strong, beautiful. The officer listened carefully, scribbling in his notebook. When I finished, he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, it sounds like you have your paperwork in order. That's good. But this is going to be messy." He wasn't kidding. Within an hour, a city inspector showed up, then an insurance adjuster, then a lawyer representing the HOA. Every few minutes, someone new arrived, adding another layer of tension to the already burning hot day. Karen, meanwhile, was putting on a full performance. She had somehow produced a neck brace from somewhere, she wasn't even injured, and was now pretending to limp dramatically around her yard. She kept shouting phrases like danger to the community and irreparable trauma to anyone who would listen. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself over and over that I had the truth on my side, that no reasonable person would believe her story once the facts came out. But fear gnawed at the edges of my mind anyway. Karen wasn't reasonable. She was dangerous. Later that night, after the crowds finally cleared and the wreckage was cordoned off with yellow tape, I sat on my porch and stared at what was left of my oak tree. My heart felt hollow. How could someone hate so much that they would destroy something so beautiful? As I sat there, Mrs. Henderson walked over with a covered plate. "You need to eat," she said gently. She handed me a stack of fresh chocolate chip cookies. I smiled weakly. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, for everything, for calling me today, for being kind." She sat beside me on the porch swing. People like Karen think power means making everyone else miserable. But kindness is power too. Never forget that. I nodded, blinking back tears. I had worked so hard for this home, for this little life I was building. I wasn't going to let her take it away. The next few days were strangely quiet. I fixed what I could, swept up fallen branches, pulled weeds, talked with my insurance company. They confirmed they would investigate, but warned me that Karen's lawsuit could make things complicated. I tried not to think about the money, about how expensive it could get, about how Karen's lies could cost me everything. One afternoon, about a week after the crash, I got a letter taped to my front door. It was thick, pages and pages stapled together. Karen was officially suing me for negligence, emotional distress, and property damage. She wanted me to pay for the repairs to her house, plus damages for pain and suffering. It felt like being punched in the stomach. I sank down onto my front steps, the letter trembling in my hands. How could this even be happening? She had illegally chopped down my tree. She had hired an unlicensed crew, and now I was the one being dragged into court? But as I sat there, feeling crushed and small, a blue pickup truck pulled up in front of my house. A tall, middle-aged man climbed out, holding a worn leather briefcase. "James Cooper?" he called out. I stood up slowly. "Yeah, that's me." He smiled warmly. "Name's Tom Walker. I'm a lawyer. Your neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, called me, said you might need some help." Hope sparked in my chest for the first time in days. I shook his hand tightly, fighting the lump in my throat. "She wasn't wrong," I said. Tom sat down beside me on the porch. "I heard about your situation. I also heard you have an arborist report, HOA letters, witness statements, and that Karen hired an unlicensed crew while you were out of town." I nodded. "All true." He smiled wider. "Good. Then we have a real case here, and I'm not the kind of lawyer who backs down from a fight." For the first time in what felt like forever, I let out a real laugh. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't over yet. The next morning, Tom and I met to start planning our defense. He explained things in simple terms I could understand. How we would file a countersuit, how we would subpoena the landscaping crew, how we could expose Karen's lies in court. It was going to be a long, messy battle, but I wasn't alone anymore. And I wasn't going to let Karen win. That evening, as I was tidying up the broken bits of tree in my yard, a black SUV pulled up in front of Karen's house. Two men in suits got out, carrying cameras and notepads. Private investigators. Karen must have hired them, probably hoping they could dig up dirt on me to use in court. I ducked behind the side of my house, peeking around the corner. One of the men started snapping pictures of my yard. The other one bent down, pretending to measure cracks in the sidewalk. My stomach twisted. This was real. This was war. And right then, as I crouched in the shadows, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Tom. "Get inside. Don't talk to them. And don't let them trick you. They're trying to build a case against you." I hurried inside, locking the door behind me, heart hammering against my ribs. I thought about Mrs. Henderson's words. Kindness is power. I needed to be strong. I needed to be smart. And most of all, I needed to be ready, because Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That night, as a thunderstorm rolled in and rain pounded against my windows, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the storm rage outside. And somewhere deep in the pit of my stomach, I knew the worst was yet to come. The next morning, When I opened my front door to grab the newspaper, I froze. Because there, spray painted across my garage door in huge red letters, were 3 words: "Tree killer scum." And standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, a smug look on her face, was Karen, watching me, waiting, smiling. I stood there for a moment, too stunned to even breathe. The ugly red words dripped down the side of my garage like blood, standing out against the light gray paint. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, not because I wanted to fight, but because if I didn't do something, I might cry right there on my driveway, and I refused to give Karen that satisfaction. She was still standing at the curb, arms crossed, smirking like she'd just won some grand prize. I forced myself to take a deep breath and pulled out my phone. I took picture after picture, getting every angle of the graffiti. Then I called Tom. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me you've got photos," he said, before I could even speak. "Dozens," I said, my voice shaking. "Good. Don't touch anything. I'm calling the police. This just became criminal damage to property. Let's see Karen wriggle her way out of that." 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. A young officer named Daniels took one look at my garage and whistled low. "Someone's got a grudge." I nodded, trying to stay calm while I explained everything. Daniels was a lot more sympathetic than the officers from the day of the crash. He carefully took photos, asked for the security footage from my doorbell cam, and even took a statement from Mrs. Henderson, who had seen Karen lurking around my yard earlier that morning. "She was pacing up and down your driveway," Mrs. Henderson said, adjusting her glasses. "Looked like a cat waiting for a mouse to come out." Karen tried to act innocent when Daniels walked over to question her. She batted her eyes and said she'd been out for a morning walk and had no idea what had happened to my garage. But the smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth gave her away. Daniels didn't arrest her right there, but he promised me they would be opening a full investigation. Between the property damage and the ongoing lawsuit, Karen was digging herself into a deeper and deeper hole. After the police left, I spent the next few hours scrubbing the red paint off the garage door. It didn't all come off. The words still left a faint stain, like a scar. Neighbors passed by all day, giving me sympathetic looks. A few stopped to offer help, but I waved them off gently. I needed to do this myself. Not for anyone else. For me. As I worked, I thought about how everything had spiraled so quickly. I had come to Willow Creek Estates looking for a peaceful, quiet life. Instead, I'd found a battlefield. And the crazy part was, I hadn't even done anything wrong. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, my arms ached and my fingers were raw. But the worst of the paint was gone. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my forehead, feeling a small flicker of pride. Karen might have tried to mark me with shame, but I wasn't going to let her. I was still standing. That night, I met with Tom at his office to go over our plan. The court date was set for 3 weeks away, but Karen had already started filing extra claims, saying I had threatened her safety by refusing to remove the dangerous tree, that I had neglected community standards, and caused emotional trauma. "She's throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks," Tom said, flipping through the thick stack of papers. "It's a desperate move, and it's good for us." He showed me a chart he'd made, connecting all the evidence: the arborist report, the photos, the timeline of her warnings, her illegal hiring of the landscapers, the witness statements, the unlicensed removal crew, and now the graffiti on my garage. Each piece painted a clear picture. Karen wasn't a victim. She was the attacker. "She's going to slip up," Tom said confidently. "People like her always do." I nodded, feeling stronger with him by my side. Still, even with Tom's encouragement, I couldn't shake the tight knot of anxiety that sat in my stomach. Court was expensive, stressful, and Karen was relentless. The next morning, I got another surprise. A thick yellow envelope from the HOA had been shoved into my mailbox. Inside was a new violation notice for unsightly damage to personal property. My garage, because of the graffiti Karen had put there. They were fining me $250. I couldn't believe it. I stormed over to the HOA office, slamming the door behind me. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman named Cheryl, looked up with a startled squeak. "I want to talk to someone about this," I said, holding up the violation notice. Cheryl sighed and handed me a clipboard. "Fill this out. We'll get back to you in 6 to 8 weeks. I laughed bitterly. 6 to 8 weeks? My court case is in 3. She just shrugged. I left the office more frustrated than I'd ever been in my life. It was clear the HOA wasn't interested in justice. They were interested in protecting their own, and Karen was the president. But I wasn't about to give up. I filed an appeal anyway. I sent copies of my police report, the photos, my security footage, everything, directly to every member of the HOA board. I wasn't sure if it would do any good, but I had to try. By the end of that week, tension in the neighborhood was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Some neighbors avoided me. Others left anonymous notes on my porch, little scraps of encouragement. "Hang in there. We believe you. Don't let her win." It was those little bits of kindness that kept me going. Then, just when things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, they did. One afternoon, while I was fixing a broken fence post in the backyard, I heard the sound of heavy boots crunching over the grass. I turned around to see 2 uniformed officers standing there, and Karen, of course, right behind them, fake tears streaming down her cheeks. "She's claiming you threatened her life," one of the officers said grimly. I stared at him, stunned. "What? I haven't even spoken to her in days." But they didn't seem interested in my side of the story. "Sir, we need you to come with us to the station to answer some questions." My stomach dropped straight through the ground. Karen smiled triumphantly behind them, her arms crossed, her eyes glittering. She had just played her biggest card yet, and I was about to walk straight into the trap. The ride to the police station felt like it lasted forever. I sat stiffly in the back seat, my hands locked together so tightly they hurt. The officers weren't rough with me, but they also weren't exactly friendly. They just kept glancing at each other like they weren't sure what to make of the situation. When we arrived, they led me into a small gray room with a table and 2 chairs. A big mirror covered one wall, and even though nobody said it out loud, I knew someone was probably watching from the other side. An older detective with a bald head and tired eyes came in about 10 minutes later. He introduced himself as Detective Harris and sat down across from me. "All right, James," he said, flipping open a thick file. "Karen Mitchell has filed a report saying you threatened her life multiple times, said you warned her that if she touched your tree, there'd be consequences." I blinked. "That's not true. I never threatened her. Not once. She also says you vandalized your own garage to make her look bad." My mouth dropped open. "That's insane. I have security footage. I have witness statements." Detective Harris held up a hand. "Calm down, son. I'm not saying I believe her. I'm just telling you what's in the report." I forced myself to breathe slowly, even though my heart felt like it was trying to break out of my chest. Harris leaned back in his chair and studied me. "You don't strike me as the type looking for trouble. Tell me everything. From the beginning." And so I did. I told him about the tree, about the fake violation letters, about Karen's threats, about the illegal landscapers, the crash, the lawsuit, the graffiti, everything. I even showed him photos and videos from my phone. By the time I finished, Harris was frowning deeply. "Sounds to me," he said slowly, "like this woman's been targeting you for a while." "She has," I said, my voice rough. He tapped his pen against the table. "All right. I'm going to recommend no charges be filed against you today. But this isn't over. We're going to open an investigation into her complaints and your complaints. You stay out of her way, you hear me? No contact, no yelling, not even a wave across the street." I nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "And lawyer up tight," Harris added, "because she's playing dirty, real dirty." They let me go about an hour later. I walked out of the station into the afternoon sun, feeling like I'd just survived a hurricane. Tom was waiting for me by my truck. "Told you she'd pull something like this," he said grimly. "But you handled it right. No contact, no reaction. That's exactly what we need." I rubbed my face, exhausted. "How do people like her sleep at night?" Tom chuckled darkly. "On a big, fluffy pillow made of lies." He clapped me on the back. "Come on, we've got work to do." Back at his office, we sat down and started building an even stronger case. Tom had connections. Private investigators way better than the ones Karen had hired. Within days, they found out some juicy details. Turns out, Karen's landscaping crew wasn't just unlicensed. They had a history of illegal work, including damaging property in other neighborhoods. One of them even had a pending lawsuit for chopping down protected trees in a city park. And best of all, one of the workers, a guy named Luis, agreed to give a sworn statement. He said on record that Karen had told them, "I gave permission to remove the tree, even though they all thought it seemed shady." "She said the HOA owns the whole street," Luis said in a recorded interview. "Said she was in charge." It was the smoking gun we needed, but even with all that good news, things at home stayed rough. Karen kept finding new ways to make my life miserable. Anonymous complaints about my trash cans. Fines for imaginary violations. She even stood at the end of her driveway some mornings, just staring at my house, arms folded, like she was daring me to step outside. I kept my head down. I went to work. I watered my flowers. I waved politely to the neighbors who still smiled at me. Every day was a battle, but every day I was still standing. One night, about a week before the court date, I got a text from Mrs. Henderson. "Check your email. Urgent." I rushed to my laptop and pulled up my inbox. There it was. A blurry cell phone video. Mrs. Henderson had recorded it from her second-story window across the street. The video showed Karen, standing with her private investigators, cutting branches off another neighbor's tree, laughing, bragging loudly about how she was going to make this place perfect, whether anyone liked it or not. And most importantly, she said, clear as day. If James had just listened, I wouldn't have had to handle it myself. But no, he wanted to play tough guy, so I showed him who's in charge. I stared at the screen, mouth open. This wasn't just vandalism. This was proof, undeniable proof, that Karen had acted on her own, intentionally, and without any legal authority. We had her. I forwarded the video to Tom immediately. His reply came seconds later. "That's it. That's our win." I barely slept that night, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. Part of me still couldn't believe it. After everything she had done, the lies, the fines, the damage, there was finally a chance for justice. But life in Willow Creek Estates had taught me one important lesson. When people like Karen start losing control, they don't go quietly. They explode. And sure enough, the next morning, there was a knock at my door. I opened it slowly, wary. Standing there, looking more furious than ever, was Karen's husband, Rick. He shoved a crumpled piece of paper into my chest. "You're going to regret this," he snarled. I unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was a letter. From the HOA. They were calling an emergency meeting. And the topic? Motion to revoke James Cooper's right to reside in Willow Creek Estates. Karen wasn't just trying to beat me in court anymore. She was trying to wipe me off the map. I stared at the letter in my hands, barely able to breathe. Revoking my right to live here. It felt like the ground beneath me shifted, like the whole world tilted sideways. I wasn't just fighting for a tree anymore. I was fighting for my home, for everything I had worked so hard to build. Rick Mitchell stood there, arms crossed, a smug grin stretching across his face. Behind him, Karen watched from their front porch, holding her phone like she was recording my reaction. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I slowly folded the letter, tucked it into my back pocket, and closed the door without a word. Inside, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. How could they even do this? I had paid my mortgage. I had followed the rules. I had tried to live peacefully. But Karen had poisoned the HOA against me so thoroughly that they were willing to kick me out without even hearing my side. My phone buzzed again. It was Tom. I answered quickly, voice shaking. They're trying to evict me. Yeah, I figured they'd pull something desperate, Tom said. Listen, the HOA can't just throw you out because they feel like it. There's a legal process. And with the evidence we've collected, we can not only stop them, we can expose them. My hands were still trembling. What do I do? Show up to that meeting, he said firmly. Bring everything. Every letter, every photo, every witness. We're going to make sure every single neighbor sees who Karen really is. The emergency HOA meeting was set for Friday night in the neighborhood clubhouse. By Thursday, everyone in Willow Creek Estates seemed to know about it. People whispered as I walked by. Some smiled, some looked away. It was impossible to tell who was on my side and who was rooting for Karen. I spent the whole day gathering my evidence. I printed out copies of the arborist report, the security footage stills, the photo of the graffiti, the police report, the video Mrs. Henderson had recorded, and even screenshots of Karen's fake violation notices. Tom came over that evening with a folder thicker than a phone book. We're going to fight fire with fire, he said, and when we're done, they won't be able to ignore the truth. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept pacing the house, going over everything again and again in my mind. What if they still sided with Karen? What if they found some loophole to kick me out anyway? But every time fear tried to pull me under, I thought about Mrs. Henderson's words. Kindness is power. And I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every quiet, peaceful person who had ever been bullied by someone louder and meaner. Friday night came fast. The clubhouse was packed. Every seat was taken. Neighbors stood against the walls, whispering to each other. The air buzzed with tension. At the front of the room, Karen sat at a long table with the rest of the HOA board, 6 members total. Most of them wore stiff smiles. Karen looked like a cat who had swallowed a canary. Tom and I took our seats near the front. He squeezed my shoulder once, a quick reminder that I wasn't alone. The meeting was called to order. Karen stood, holding up a thick binder. We are here tonight, she said sweetly, to address the ongoing disruption and violations caused by homeowner James Cooper. His negligence has endangered our community, caused property damage, and created emotional distress among our residents. The board will now vote to terminate his right to residency per the HOA charter. Some people in the crowd clapped weakly. Others stayed silent. Karen smiled like a queen. Before the vote, Tom said loudly, standing up, we request the right to present evidence. Karen's face twitched. The board hesitated. Finally, the HOA vice president, a woman named Janet, nodded. You may proceed. Tom flipped open his folder. He didn't start with the legal stuff. He started with the video. The grainy clip played on a big projector screen at the front of the room. Karen's voice echoed through the clubhouse. If James had just listened, I wouldn't have had to handle it myself. But no, he wanted to play tough guy, so I showed him who's in charge. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Tom didn't stop there. He played the security footage of the landscapers cutting the tree. He showed the arborist report. He showed the police report about the graffiti. He even showed the fake violation letters Karen had sent, comparing them to official HOA notices, proving they were different. Neighbor after neighbor gasped. Some started murmuring angrily. When Tom finished, he turned back to the board. This isn't about a dangerous tree. This is about one person's abuse of power. James Cooper has followed every rule. It's Karen Mitchell who has broken the law, repeatedly. She has endangered public safety, committed vandalism, filed false police reports, and misused HOA authority for personal revenge. He pointed to me. And now she wants to punish the victim. Karen's face had gone pale. Her hands trembled where they gripped the table. One of the board members, a gray-haired man named Mr. Walters, leaned into his microphone. "Is this true, Mrs. Mitchell?" Karen stood up, her voice shrill. "Those videos are fake. He made them up." Mrs. Henderson stood from the audience. "I recorded that video myself," she said calmly, "and I saw her spray paint his garage." Another neighbor stood, then another, and another. Voices rose in the room. "She's been harassing him for months. She threatened to fine me over a Halloween decoration. She fined me because my kids left a tricycle in the driveway for 10 minutes. The room exploded into chaos. Karen tried to shout over them, but it was useless. Finally, the board called for a vote, not to evict me, to remove Karen as HOA president. The votes came in, one by one, all 6 in favor. Karen Mitchell was officially removed. As she realized what was happening, Karen let out a shriek of pure rage. Rick grabbed her by the arm, trying to pull her toward the door. She fought him the whole way, screaming about lawsuits, about conspiracies, about revenge. The clubhouse doors slammed shut behind her, and just like that, the storm was over. People turned to me, clapping me on the back, shaking my hand, thanking me for standing up. Mrs. Henderson hugged me tightly. "You did it, James," she whispered. "You saved this neighborhood." Tom grinned. "And we're not done yet. She's still facing charges for property damage and false reporting, and you've got a countersuit to win." It was overwhelming. I wasn't used to so much attention, so much kindness. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about standing up when it mattered most. It was about showing that one act of courage, backed by truth, could outshine even the darkest lies. I walked home that night under a clear sky full of stars. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace settle over me. The kind of peace you earn. The kind that no one can take away. Or so I thought. Because just when I thought the nightmare was over, a new storm was already brewing. And this time, it wasn't just Karen I had to worry about. It was the whole HOA. 3 days after Karen was removed, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it was just congratulation texts from neighbors. Maybe someone was sharing the news that Karen had finally left the neighborhood for good. But when I picked up the phone and saw the headlines, my stomach dropped. Homeowner wins against corrupt HOA president, but faces new threats from HOA board. Someone had leaked the story to the local news, and not just any story. They had leaked my entire fight, the tree, the lawsuit, the graffiti, the fake fines, everything. My name, my face, my address. It was all out there now. By noon, news vans were parked up and down Willow Creek Estates. Reporters with cameras and microphones knocked on my door nonstop. Some wanted to paint me as a hero. Others clearly smelled blood, hoping I'd say something reckless they could twist into a scandal. I stayed inside, curtains drawn, trying to make sense of what was happening. Tom called me not long after. "Bad news," he said grimly. "The HOA board is furious about the leak. They're blaming you. They're planning to file a new motion to fine you for bringing negative publicity to the community." I laughed out loud. A wild, desperate kind of laugh. "They're still trying to ruin me?" I said, almost not believing it. "They're desperate," Tom said. "Karen's gone, but they're scared now. Scared of what else might come out." And that's when it clicked. They weren't mad because I embarrassed them. They were mad because they were guilty too. Tom helped me file a Freedom of Information request with the city. We dug through public records, HOA budgets, meeting minutes, everything we could find, and what we found made my blood boil. Karen and several board members had been funneling HOA funds into private consulting fees. Thousands of dollars, meant for neighborhood repairs, playground updates, landscaping, had gone straight into their pockets. They had been robbing the neighborhood blind for years, and now, thanks to their own foolishness, we had the proof. It was a bombshell. Tom helped me organize everything into one big report. And the next day, we held a neighborhood meeting at the park. Not the clubhouse. They tried to lock us out of there. Neighbors came in droves, families, retirees, young couples, people who had lived there for decades, people who had been quietly suffering under the HOA's nonsense for too long. I stood in front of them, heart pounding, holding the stack of documents in my hands. I didn't want any of this, I told them. I came here for peace, for a community, for a home, and I know that's what you came here for too. But we've been lied to, stolen from, bullied, and it's time we took our neighborhood back. I showed them the documents, the fake consulting fees, the missing maintenance funds, the bonuses the board had voted for themselves without telling anyone. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then came the anger, real, burning anger. By the end of that meeting, the entire HOA board, every last one of them, had been voted out by a landslide. A new board was formed, made up of real neighbors, good people, honest people. Mrs. Henderson was elected president. She cried when they announced it, hugging me tight. "You gave us our home back, James," she whispered. "You reminded us that we have the power." Karen and Rick? They moved out under the cover of night 2 weeks later. Word was, they were facing criminal charges for fraud and property damage. I never saw them again. And my oak tree? Well, the pieces that survived the crash were carefully preserved. The new board hired a local artist to carve them into a beautiful bench, placed right in the middle of the neighborhood park. They even mounted a plaque on it, in honor of standing tall against injustice. Every time I walk past it, I smile, not because I won, but because kindness, truth, and persistence won. Because even when the storm rages, even when the bullies scream the loudest, there's a strength in standing your ground, a strength no one can chop down, not even a Karen, not ever. And that's the real story of how the HOA Karen chopped down my $75,000 tree and ended up destroying herself instead.